This video is sponsored by Battle Legion. Now, Battle Legion is a mass battle strategy game available for iOS and Android with 100 versus 100 unit player versus player battles. You can design your own army layout and watch the battle automatically unfold. You can customize your army with tons of different units with some funny and unique mechanics, all customizable with skins and power stones. There are multiple game modes for you to play, from the main PvP mode, skirmish puzzles, bounty hunt mini missions, and epic clan raid battles. And brand new game modes, units, and ranks are coming, and the game has a very active Discord community where players go to discuss winning strategies, tips, and more, with developers participating in the chat, and you can find their weekly streams on YouTube. And the clan raid battles is the major new update of the game where your entire clan works together to beat epic bosses. So make sure to check out Battle Legion by clicking the link in the description below. So it is now 2021, aka the 30th anniversary of Sonic, which means we are going to be getting a game reveal or game reveals very soon. And since these games are going to be essentially the first games to drop early on in the console generation since Sonic 06, there is one question that we have to discuss, and that is, will the 30th anniversary Sonic game be a next-gen game or a cross-gen game? So we're gonna break this down nice and easy. We'll discuss what I mean by both of these things if you don't already know for some reason, and then we can get into what I think it will be and what I think it should be. So yes, console generations exist for a reason. It's because after a certain amount of time, the console becomes outdated as technology advances and things need to get more powerful to accommodate the increasing graphical requirements of later games. You know, PCs are always moving. There's new hardware every 1 to 2 years, and consoles just stay the same for like 5+ years, and eventually they have to give you a new box that can play more powerful games. I was gonna say better games, but that's not true, because Sonic Heroes is the greatest game ever, and that came out 2003. Anyway, back in the early 2000s, we got games like Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and Shadow the Hedgehog, and those all fit within that 6th generation of gaming. And of course, when they needed to move to a higher level of graphical fidelity, they had to leave that hardware behind. Enter Sonic 06. That was pushing the graphics of the systems it was on. I mean, on PS3, it had slowdown, and obviously, like, I get that it was rushed, but at the same time, it was pushing the graphics, and the PS3 was hard to develop for, which is obviously why it was able to hit 60 FPS on 360 without all the slowdown. Cue in Unleashed just a few years later, and that was having serious frame rate issues. There was no way they were gonna get Unleashed to run on the PS2 or 06 to run on the PS2, which is why even for Unleashed they had to develop a whole separate version for PS2 that was tailored for its graphics. And realistically, the only reason why they even did that was because of the Wii, knowing that the Wii was a current gen console that still was around similar levels of power to the previous gen. But yes, a next gen game is a game that focuses solely on the next generation of hardware and essentially ditches the previous generation of consoles, meaning that that game is made to run on next gen, and people on previous consoles are just gonna have to suck it, even if that's the majority of the people using consoles at the time, because most people haven't gotten the next generation. Some games just can't be cross-gen, and cross-gen is essentially a game that runs on both generations. For example, Balan Wonderworld is a game that's coming out in March of 2021 and is going to run on PS5, Xbox Series X, but still run on the previous gen, which is PS4, Xbox One, and of course Nintendo Switch. So what are the pros and cons of both? Obviously, if you focus on just next gen, the biggest con is that there's a smaller player base, less people to purchase that game because not everyone has a PS5 or Series X. Nintendo haven't even made their next gen console to fit alongside PS5 and Series X. We are still waiting on that Switch Pro announcement, which will probably be their answer to that. So if you drop a game that's solely next gen at a time when most people haven't gotten next gen, then you're missing out on potential sales. I mean, for example, Sonic sells most on Nintendo. Like with Sonic Forces, the highest selling port was the Switch version, even though that was the worst version because the Switch was the weakest console. The advantage though is that you get to push graphics a little bit further because you don't have to worry about accommodating weaker hardware. You can put a bit more effort into making the visuals be more future proof, whereas a cross-gen, you have to make sure that it runs well on the previous generation and then essentially put it on next gen as well, but your priority essentially is the previous gen, making sure it runs well on that, and then after that just simply porting it and maybe adding a few little touches to the graphics so that it looks a bit nicer, maybe a higher resolution, maybe a slightly higher frame rate. So after discussing the pros and cons, it seems pretty obvious where things are going to land, because it's not 2006 anymore. Sonic is not selling the way it used to. They couldn't just go full next gen like they did in 06 and essentially still sell a lot of units. They have to make sure they're on everything. So most likely, assuming the game doesn't get delayed to 2022 release, release or something like that. They are going to push for that total release where they have PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and still have PS5 and Series X. As they are backwards compatible, the work to get it running on next gen is essentially near nothing at that point. And also given the fact that the Hedgehog Engine 2 was built to run games like Forces, and that's already on PS4, Xbox One, and Switch, it would make sense for them to use that engine again, achieve maybe 1080p 60 FPS, and then maybe increase the resolution for PS5, Series X, maybe get 4K 60 on that. And of course, I'm really referring to like the big budget title, because if there's some kind of sprite-based game, you know, why would they cut out PS4 and Xbox One and Switch for that, you know? But the reason I made this video is not just to state the obvious of, oh yeah, it's gonna run on the PS4 generation as well as the PS5 generation. Like, yeah, it sounds pretty obvious. But I want to talk about what I want to see, which is I want to see them focus on next gen. And I'll tell you why. As I already said, if you go for next gen, you are essentially future-proofing the game. You can push the graphics further. Now, I've had a 4K monitor since about 2016, so I've been playing games at 4K for a while. And while I enjoy gaming at 4K, it didn't feel like that big of a deal compared to say like 1440p or even 1080. But then I realized something last year. The only reason why I felt like it wasn't that big of a deal is because I was still playing games that were designed with 1080p in mind. I was playing Sonic Generations, Sonic Unleashed, which I know that didn't run at 1080p, but you know, that kind of era of games like Prince of Persia, The Forgotten Sands, like PS3 games that were also on PC, and at 4K they look better, but the textures and everything was designed for that HD environment, 720p, 1080p, so I didn't actually respect what 4K could truly do. That was until I got a PS5 on launch day. Yes, I got one on launch day, and I was playing the exclusives like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and seeing what they were able to accomplish with actually focusing on 4K. Now obviously Insomniac did a great job with Spider-Man. They were able to get it to run on PS4 as well. They really optimized the fuck out of that game. Unlike Cyberpunk 2077, which I saw that game on YouTube at 4K 60 FPS. When running at good settings, the great hardware looks amazing at 4K. And it's like, when they actually target the powerful hardware like Cyberpunk did, because clearly they didn't focus on their PS4 and Xbox One ports that much, but when they focus on the powerful hardware, you can see what happens in the visuals. Cyberpunk is a very great looking game when played on the good hardware, and I'm sure once they patch it and they release the definitive PS5 and Series X versions, the console guys will be able to see it as well. But they tried to do something that they shouldn't have done, which was accommodate the previous generation. Now obviously for them it makes sense because they announced that thing years ago. Like, I wasn't even 18 when the game was announced. It was that long ago. But with the case of Sonic, I just think that games like Generations and Unleashed are starting to show their graphical age. When you play a game like Spider-Man Miles Morales at 4K and you see the high-res textures, the insane reflections due to ray tracing, as well as all the other graphical bumps, and then you go back to an Unleashed or Generations, they're still beautiful games, but you start to notice the textures are lower res, the HUD isn't as high, its age is starting to get more noticeable. Now, if they can make a 2021 game that runs at 4K 60 FPS on PS5 and Series X and can still run at a good resolution and frame rate, whether it's 1080p 60 on PS4, Xbox One, and then like 720 30 on Switch, if it can do that, then still support the previous generation. But in my opinion, I would rather see them push the graphical boundaries forward even more. Like, we're in an era where there's ray tracing, we're in an era where there's so many things that if they were to go all out and take the inspiration from that Unleashed art style but then do it again while optimizing for 4K, I would rather see that. And I know you're probably thinking, well, you got a PS5 on launch day, you know, so of course you're gonna say that. I mean, I'm more of a PC gamer anyway, so even if I didn't get a PS5 on launch, I'd still have to like upgrade my PC because my hardware is getting kind of dated. But I just want to see them push the boundaries of graphics again like they used to do. Like, 06 was visually at the time, it was one of the best looking games, I have to say. And I'm not being a biased Sonic fan. I really did look at the games that were coming out at the time, like Gears of War and whatnot. It was up there. Unleashed was pushing graphical boundaries. Forces, on the other hand, was not really. I mean, it wasn't a bad looking game. Obviously Hedgehog Engine 2 is great. I just think the art style let it down, and obviously the levels were pretty basic, so you weren't able to appreciate the visuals as much. Like, there was this area like at the end of Spaceport where you can see like this whole section that you can't go to, and I'm like, that looks really nice. Like, there's potential there, but they just didn't execute it perfectly. And I think if they focused on next gen, then they could finally hit that area, especially for getting an Adventure remake, because having an Adventure remake that's like future proof for PS5 and Series X, optimized for 4K as opposed to like making it for PS4 and Xbox PS1 first, I think would be better if they just push it for next gen, get that shit looking great, like Unreal Engine 5 levels, but obviously more like in tune with Sonic's art style, and then that would be the new definitive like graphical level. Yeah, some people wouldn't be able to play it on launch, but eventually you would appreciate what it does, because once you do get your PS5 or your Series X or your PC or even your Nintendo Switch Pro, we now have a game that essentially could be modded for the next decade and it's still gonna look great. Essentially what Gens did for a good decade, we could get that again. And there's also little things like the whole SSDs being used on the PS5 and Series X kind of affecting the kind of games you can get. Like with Ratchet and Clank, they've got this whole like changing dimensions kind of thing where it's like moving through different worlds, and you can only do that because of the super fast loads. I'm not saying the next Sonic game is gonna do that, but it's still worth mentioning in case they're making a brand new title and they want to do something different that relies on that faster SSD that wouldn't work on previous gen. But unfortunately they're not going to do this. They're gonna stick with obviously running on PS4, Xbox One and Switch. That means we're gonna miss out on certain next gen benefits. If we even get ray tracing in the next game, I don't know how far they're gonna go. If they do it like Insomniac, you could get all versions being good and it doesn't feel like any versions being held back. So it is possible for them to do it both ways, you know, have their cake and eat it. But I mean, we're comparing Insomniac to Sonic Team here, so you can see the issue. I guess the ideal situation would be 4K 60 FPS on PS5, Series X, 1080p 60 FPS on PS4, Xbox One and Switch Pro, and most likely like 1080p 30 FPS on the original Switch. And this is probably wishful thinking, but I would hope that they have some kind of 4K 30 FPS mode, which is like super max graphics, high fidelity like they did on Spider-Man Miles Morales, where it's like they're pulling out all the tricks, ray tracing, all the shit, and it's just like super beautiful. And obviously it's not going to be as smooth, but you can have like a toggle to switch to 60 FPS and lower some of the settings, but at least it's there. Like at least you can see how pretty it gets. And because there's a PC port, eventually you'll be able to run it at the max settings at 60 FPS or even 120 or 144 FPS. You know, we're getting to that point now where high refresh rate monitors are taking off. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about this. What do you think we're gonna see? I mean, pretty much I think we're gonna see a cross-gen game. But what do you want to see? Do you agree with me? Do you want to see a next-gen focused game? Make sure to check out Battle Legion, sponsor of today's video. The link will be in the description. But yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell. Subscribe to the No Channel, link in the description. But that's all I have to say right now. So, Remy out.